In our sitting videos, I went through concepts of how to sit and sitting less, but sometimes it's nice to get a quick and easy version of exactly what you're supposed to do. So with that said, here's 5 easy steps to sitting better. The first would be to slide forward. As you begin working on sitting well, scoot to the edge of your chair and get your knees below your hips. This can help because most people have poor hip flexibility, so the higher the knees are, the more their pelvis has to rock backwards to account for the hip joint and muscle stiffness. Good posture depends primarily on how you sit on your bum, the pressure that you have in your belly, and the flexibility of your hips. I had to include hip flexibility somewhere because I consistently see this as the primary physical limitation that prevents people from being successful in changing how they sit. Guys tend to lose this earlier than girls, and most time it gets blamed on flexibility. In reality, the biggest correlation that I see is floor time. This means that people who either get on the floor because they have younger kids, or they have a manual job that requires them to get down on the floor, or they just like to sit on the floor, they tend to have more flexibility through their hips because they're not trying to stretch out their hips for 2 minutes and then get back up into a chair. They're letting their hips be in a more flexed position than they would be in a chair for a longer period of time. This is a whole separate issue. So for now, if you find that your hips are too tight or stiff and that makes it hard for you to sit on your sit bones, slide your bum to the edge of your seat and get those knees below your hips. Step number 2 is to sit your sit bones down. Get your pelvis into neutral by rotating it forward off of your tailbone and onto your sit bones. One cheat I have people use is that if they're sitting back in their chair or in the car for a long time, is to put a soft back book or a pool noodle behind your sacrum, your tailbone area, not your lumbar, to prevent it from rocking backwards. This is especially helpful for people who have joint pain aggravated by sitting. As you get better at using your intra-abdominal pressure while you sit and your joint motion is corrected, you should notice that you can ditch the support without creating extra tension in your back. If you find that you don't have any issues maintaining your pelvis in neutral or sitting on your sit bones without support and with getting your butt to the edge, you can skip to step 3. Again, getting your pelvis to stay in this position shouldn't take much effort, and if it does, keep experimenting for a little bit or get help from a professional. Step number 3 is to breathe. Sitting well requires core activation, but when most people think about their core, they think of a six-pack, or the lack thereof, or sucking in their gut. And both of these are actually not at all what we're going for here. It's much more effective to work on breathing properly to get your core to engage and to be able to use it to support you when you sit. It's also an assessment for how well you're sitting. If you're slouched forward, you can't allow your diaphragm and your core muscle space to move, and it gets really hard to take a deep breath in. This is assuming that you're breathing correctly with your belly, not with your chest. Go watch the breathing video and work on those techniques first. If you try to breathe well at the same time that you have a neutral pelvis, it feels like your abdomen relaxes a little bit and opens up. Step 4 is to slide your head back. Once you've created a rock-solid foundation for your upper half, getting your head over your shoulders where it should be gets way easier. This mostly feels like it's giving yourself a double chin, then easing up an inch or so. Because you're stacked it more efficiently from below, this takes way less effort to maintain than before. Step 5 is to go slow and steady. Just like you wouldn't expect yourself to run 10 miles without working up to it, sitting well for a while takes muscle you may not have. It can seem like an exaggeration, but it does take a little time to get comfortable with this because you're using muscles that you don't typically use and you're building different habits. That said, once you do get the hang of this, it should be much, much easier. When you do feel tension, go through your mental checklist and think about where your positioning fell apart. So where do you go from here? Make a sticky note reminder of the cues for yourself in your typical sitting areas to practice over the next couple of weeks. Know what areas tend to cause you to sit the worst and see if there's something you can change to that environment to help change your positioning. For example, cars tend to be a hard place to sit well, so start by putting a semi-hard object behind you to change your pelvic positioning. If you're struggling with this, you may need help. For most people, just sitting better can reduce the tension that sitting creates. Some people have had too much restriction build over time, and sitting like this can seem honestly impossible. If that's the case, contact your local favorite movement professional to get some help eliminating the restriction that's keeping you from sitting well. If the concepts are what's stumping you, you can go more in depth with the links in the description below. And lastly, happy sitting.